friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a card for you using this super pretty Reverse Confetti Toucan of Friendship stamp set. And I will also be using the Simple Stories Faith 6x8 pattern paper pack. So I'm going to start off with my Copic coloring today, and I wanted to color my images to match my pattern paper that I'll be using. So there is no black in this pattern paper pack, but there is a really dark navy. So just for something different and fun, I decided to color my toucan navy. So I'm starting out with B34, B37, and B39. And because there is quite a bit of difference between these three markers, I decided to start out with that B34 and just give it a base coat to kind of saturate the paper and get things ready to blend. Now I'm going in with that B39 and starting to lay in my shadows. And not just shadows, but also some definition, because it's very easy when you're coloring with dark colors to kind of lose the separation between parts of the bodies. It would be really easy to make that wing blend in with his body and so on. So I'm just trying to create light and dark areas that are going to look natural and make sure that the different parts stand out. So you'll notice that I'm leaving that top area of the wing pretty light, but I'm shading the area around that wing pretty dark so that there's a lot of contrast. And don't be afraid to go back over it a couple of times to build up the layers of color and really get the look and the definition that you're going for. So now that I'm happy with the body, I'm going to move on to the tail. So I'm just adding a little more B39 to cast a shadow right under his body there and under the branch that he's sitting on. And then I'm blending that out with the B37 as my mid-tone. And then I'll finish up with that B34 as my highlighted color at the bottom there. And that's going to make a nice contrast again, just like there is on the rest of his body. Next I'll be using R20, R22, R24, and R29, and I'm going to start with that R29, just coloring in a section of the toucan's beak, and I'll blend that out with the R24 and finish with the R22. While I definitely enjoy coloring my critters to look realistic as they do in nature, it can also be fun sometimes to take a little bit of artistic license and do some different color combinations, especially with an animal such as this toucan that is a very naturally colorful bird. And that's definitely what I'm doing today. I'm taking that same color combo that I used on the first section of his beak, the R29, R24, and R22, and I'm going to color in two of my flowers. I'm just using that R29 in the center area and then blending out with the R24 and then leaving a little bit on the edges of the petals for the R22. Shading your flowers darker in the center and lighter at the edges is what's going to help them look a little bit more concave. Since red markers are notorious for bleeding outside of the lines, I'm going to skip over the next section of his beak and move on to the third one there. And for that I used the R24, the R22, and the R20. And I'm going to use that same color combination to color in these two flowers here. I stamped out two of every flower and then three of the small flower clusters and three of the leaves. So I'm just starting with that R20 and giving them a little bit of a wash, and then I'm going to outline that little inside area with the R22. And blend that with the R20, just using those two color combos on this section of the flower. I decided to leave off that R24 so that the pink and the red flowers didn't look too similar. And I'll take the R39 to color in the centers of the red flowers since it just needed a bit more contrast. Now that both the navy and the red sections have dried, I can move on to coloring my toucan's face. And for that I'm using Y13, Y15, and Y17. And I'm just starting with that Y17 and putting a bit of contrast there right next to the edge of his body. I'm going to blend that out with the Y15, and then I'll finish up with Y13 so that the front section of his face is nice and bright. Just taking a little bit of that Y15 to help the Y13 blend a little bit more. And then I'm just coloring in his feet with the Y15. They're super tiny, so I just decided to do an all over coat of the Y15 and then just add a little bit of the Y17 to the very tops to help them be a little bit shadowed. And then I'm taking the Y17 to color in the centers of some of my flowers, and the Y15 to color in the centers of my pink flowers. And I missed the center of that flower on the far right, so I just went back with the Y17 for that. The next color combo I'm using is the BG11, BG13, and BG15. And I'm starting with another section of his beak with the BG15, just blending out with the BG13 and finishing with the BG11. I'm also taking that BG11 and just flicking out a little color from the centers on these two thinner petaled flowers so that they look white but have a little bit of shadow and contrast on them. And for these tiny little trio of flower clusters, I'm just using one marker on each of those since they're so tiny. So there's two styles of leaves here in our collection of images. The one that's on the branch that he's sitting on, and then there's also the other style that I stamped out, and they both look very different, so I want to make sure to color them differently. So for the branch that he's sitting on, I'm using YG05, YG07, and YG09. I colored the stem solid with the YG09 since it's super thin. And now I'm just going darkest to lightest from the inside edge of those leaves. And then I'm taking the YG09 and just flicking on a little line of color from the centers. For the other three leaves, I pulled out YG00, YG01, and YG03. And I'm coloring the stems with the YG03 and again going darkest to lightest out from the center of the leaves. I actually ended up not using the YG00 because it was a little bit too yellow, and I thought I didn't want my leaves to look like they might be dying or something. I just wanted them to have a tropical feel. So I blended out completely with the YG01, and then I'm going to go in with the YG05. And just as I did on the other leaves, I'm just going to add a little flick of color right out from the center to add that pop of fresh green so that they definitely look vibrant. But there's still enough difference between those leaves and the ones on the branch that he's sitting on. For the last little section of the toucan's beak, I'm going to use BG11. And I'll just blend that out a bit with the colorless blender so it fades off into white. And then I'm going to grab my B37 again and just dot a little color into the very centers of my pink flowers, and that will help them tie back into the toucan nicely. So now it's time to choose my pattern papers, and I decided on a layout, so I'm going to need 3 different prints. I thought this wood grain might be good as a backdrop for my toucan. This large navy floral was the inspiration for my coloring, and I quite like the aqua stripe on the back of that. All 3 of these complement each other but don't overpower each other. So now I'm just going to lay out my dies and make sure they all fit, and they do, so I'll just run them through my Cuttlebug. I've got the Lawn Fawn Stitched Rectangle Stackables, the Neat and Tangled Scallop dies, and the Lawn Fawn Stitched Journaling Card die. Before I start to layer on my elements, I just want to stamp my sentiment out on my focal panel, and for that I'm using Lawn Fawn Deep Sea ink. And that reads A Little Toucan of My Friendship, which I think is super cute. I'm just going to stamp that out a second time so that it's nice and bold. And while I have my Misty out, I thought I'd go ahead and stamp the inside of my card as well. And I've switched to some guava ink, and I'm stamping out the second toucan in that set, as well as a sentiment that says, "You're so tweet." And I decided to do that in the bottom left corner just for something different. So I've got all my images die cut with the matching dies, and I've added some foam tape to the back of the toucan. So I'm just going to figure out where I want to put him on the card, and I'm going to add him very lightly. I don't want to push him down until I'm very sure where I want him. And then I'm going to go ahead and start to add my little clusters of images. So I want to surround him with some of these flowers and leaves. So I'm going to put some above and in front of him, below. And then I want to save a couple of images for the top left corner. I wanted to fill in that space and kind of just dress that up a little bit. I added the stem of that leaf facing inside so that I'll be able to cover that up with some florals. And I'm using a combination of Tombow Mono Multi Glue and some Scotch 3M foam tape. Most of the images are adhered flat with the Tombow Mono Multi Glue, with just a couple of images popped up for a little bit of dimension. So I'm just tucking this little pink flower in. I love using this Tombow Mono Multi Glue because you can move your images around a bit. You have a little bit of wiggle room before it dries, so that you can scoot things over and adjust as needed. I'm going to pop up this red flower there and just have that overlapping the branch a bit. And as you see, I can still adjust those flowers for a couple more seconds until they dry completely permanent. I added my pink flower to the top cluster with some foam tape so that each little section has one-dimensional aspect. And now I'm just going to take these little flower trios and tuck those into each section as well, so that there's a nice little pop of cool toned color in each little grouping. I've die cut a piece of plain white cheap cardstock with that neat and tangled scallop die just to add a little bit of support to this aqua stripe. And that is going to be popped up with foam tape as well, so that's going to give it a little bit more stability and support. I'll use some Tombow Mono Multi Glue to adhere my focal panel right to that, so that I have that nice scalloped detail all around the edge. My card base is a piece of Lawn Fawn Guava cardstock, scored and folded to a standard portrait style card, so that's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. And I'm just going to glue my background pattern paper straight to that. Make sure it's lined up really well and then press that down. I'll take some more Scotch 3M foam tape and add that to the back of my panel. I love this stuff. I buy it in big rolls on Amazon because I use so much of it. So I'll just peel off the backer sheets on those, and then I'm going to line that up on my card front and press that into place. To finish up the card, I wanted to add a few embellishments, the first being these little sparkling clear sequins from Pretty Pink Posh. I've got the 4 and the 6 millimeter size. I'm adding some dots of Ranger Multimedia Matte where I think the sequins will look good, and then I'm going to use my Pick Me Up tool to just set those into place. This tool has a little bit of putty in the tip that works great for grabbing small embellishments. And then the little piece that comes out really helps you to set them down into place. And this adhesive works really great for these sequins as well. I haven't had any trouble with them popping off through the mail since I switched to the Ranger Multimedia Matte for these. Next, I'm going to grab my Sakura Glaze pin. This is in the color black, and I'm just going to color over the eye to make it nice and bold and shiny. And as a final embellishment, I'm going to take my favorite crystal stickles and I'm going to fill in the centers of all of my flowers. And this is going to add a really pretty touch of sparkle, and the crystal seems to work well no matter what color you put it over. It kind of picks up the colors that surround it and gives off a really pretty shimmery look. And that is going to complete our card for today. There you can see some of that glitter and shimmer from the stickles and the sequins, and there's another peek at the inside of our card. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Hopefully you picked up some tips on mixing different pattern papers together on one card design, and also how to color your images to match your pattern paper. Here's a couple extra videos I thought you might also enjoy, and you can always click on my photo to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that already. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.